Now, where is he? Ah, I see him. Okay.
I'm here.
Perfect. How are you, Guillaume?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Very well. Very warm today in Hong Kong. It almost feels like summer.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, not sure about this weather because it's going a bit too awkward. And it's almost 30 degrees today. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's a bit unusual.
Yeah.
And
Well,
how are things over in Volnay?
good, but not that warm. It's it, it's quite chilly this week.
Okay.
Finally, we have some winter coming,
Okay,
but
good.
everything's fine. Yeah.
I saw some pictures with snow in the vineyards.
It's not really snow. It's just more early morning.
Morning frost or something?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. So it goes away during the day.
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just the
Good.
very early morning stuff. But this morning we had another very nice view on the Mont Blanc. Very clear sky.
Okay.
Uh, Beautiful winter sky.
Great. Let me change to a nicer photo which you sent to us. Let's see. Voila. Okay. That's where you are in that beautiful house.
Yes, that's where I am.
Okay,
In my
well, yeah, good. Okay, so thank you for joining us, Guillaume, with our live tasting session. Um, it's a great pleasure to see you and also to do this tasting with you. And so are all of our customers in Hong Kong who will be joining us live, and some of us they'll be viewing this a bit later. So we sold quite a few sets. Hopefully they're ready and got the corkscrew and glasses ready to taste with you. But before we go to the wine, please enlighten us. Tell us the lovely history of this, great domain, which your family has, been in the position of having owning for what, over 200 years. So give us a
Yeah.
bit of background, give us a bit of history, and I'll leave you to that.
Okay. Thank you, Paolo. Good evening to you all, and thanks, Paolo, for this opportunity to talk to my friends in Hong Kong. I miss coming to Hong Kong. I had taken the habit of coming like twice a year in the last few years, and I feel something is missing in my life that I'm not coming over. Um, yeah, like you said, it's a long history. This estate, you've known the estate for a long time. But my ancestor purchased it in 1804, so 215 years ago, and it's been in my family since then, and always run by a family member. But really, the most important member of the family for the estate is my grandfather, because he arrived in Volnay at the estate in 1905, approximately 1905. And he's the one who actually replanted the entire estate, which had been destroyed at the end of the 19th century by phylloxera, like most of Burgundy. And so my grandfather, Sam, proceeded to replant the estate and put it on the map, so to speak, in many different ways. One of which, of course, was the fact that he was one of the very first estates to start bottling on the estate. And he had to start this because he had gone into quite difficult relationships with the negociants in Beaune. He was suing some of them because they were mixing his wines with other wines and calling them Volnay
Wow.
regardless. And therefore, the negociants retaliated by saying, if you sue us, we will not buy your wines in bulk. And therefore, my grandfather had no choice but to start estate bottling, which, of course, was a wonderful visionary move. So it turned out very well for him and for me as a result, of course. And he became a very famous man in Burgundy for that reason. And he was charged by his peers to cast in stone, to write down the hierarchy of Côte de Beaune and Côte de Nuit that became later the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée in 1935. So since then, of course, the hierarchy of Burgundy has literally not changed. At the margin, a few things have moved, as you know, but really the bulk of what was written up at that stage, together, my grandfather and Henri Gouge from Domaine Gouge in Nuit Saint-Georges, all that is still in force today, which is, I guess, a good testimony for the good work that these two gentlemen did at the time. And so then my father took over the estate in the early 50s and remained at the helm for 52 years, 52 harvests in a row. And he died prematurely in July 2003, which is when I took over the estate.
Which is the year I met you.
Which is the year you met me, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, for me, it was quite big shoes to fill because of my grandfather's reputation, like I just said, and also my father's reputation, because he had vinified 52 vintages, and I had none. I had come back to the estate, of course, on a regular basis, but I had a previous life which had nothing to do with winemaking, because I was in banking for 25 years, and so the return to the estate was always expected, was in the plans, but not the timing was not that actually came about, because my father's passing away was unexpected at the time. So I returned, and I had to be thrown in a deep end immediately because of that. And I learned, I was surrounded by very benevolent people, people I could learn from, and good partners like yourselves. And slowly but surely, of course, I tried to put my mark on the estate, without changing very many things, because everything that my father had done, I always liked. I liked his wines very much. I had no intention to change the style, but of course, everyone has an ego, and everyone wants to put the mark, its mark, his generation's mark, I suppose, on the wines and on the estate. So my big move, my only major move, I would say, I did plenty of small things, but the only major move was to convert the estate to biodynamic farming, which I did gradually, because I didn't want to take too much risks. But I started that conversion in 2006 and completed it in 2009. And now, of course, since 2009, the estate has been 100% biodynamically farmed, which I think was a very interesting move, and I have no regrets, much to the contrary. So the estate today is slightly bigger than it was when my father ran it, because I was able to purchase a couple of parcels in Volnay. But overall, we have about 16 hectares, of which 11 and a half or close to 12 hectares are actually in Volnay Premier Cru. And to give you a sense of scale, the entirety of the village in Volnay Premier Cru is like 110 hectares in Volnay Premier Cru total. Yeah. Again, in terms of scale, that's the size of Château Latour, which is owned by one person. Whereas in Volnay, you have like 50 different winemakers sharing that 110 hectares. So I'm the lucky guy who has more than 10% of the acreage. and I feel very privileged, of course, and humbled by that. And So if you deduct those about 12 hectares, you have about 1 hectare in Meursault-Sainte-Nord, which you have never liked, Paolo, and then a small piece in Pommard, and then the rest is in regional appellations, which you'd be glad to hear that I purchased 1 hectare of Bourgogne Rouge 2 years ago. So first vintage with the new acreage is in vintage 19, which provides perhaps an opening to sell more Burgundy Red into the Hong Kong market. So overall, about 16 hectares, like I said, all farmed biodynamically, and all, of course, everything we bottle, we own. Yeah, we
including the Bourgogne Rouge. It's also biodynamic.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, everything is. So, and of course, we sell all over the world. About 3/4 to 80% of the production is exported to various countries in the world, including Hong Kong, for many years now. So is that it as the background? Is that enough, or do you want me to go into details about vinification and things like that too? Or
that's wonderful for the time being, but I do have a question. So from the time when your ancestors bought it in the early 1800s, 1805, how much has it changed from then until your father?
Not very much at all. Not very much
Okay.
at all. Yeah. You know, most of the estate, when it was purchased in 1804, was released after the French Revolution. You know, this property had been confiscated by the revolutionaries, and when the revolution was over, some of those estates were put back on the market, and this was purchased in not just one lot. In fact, a couple of parcels, I think, were bought in the first half of the 19th century, but not in 1804, and added to the estate. But overall, you know, the bulk of it was what it is today.
Okay, great.
And my house that you see on the picture is, of course, older than that. It's early 1700s, the house.
Still in one piece.
Still
looks beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. So please tell us a bit about the different vineyards. Maybe we can help ourselves with the first wine while you explain the 4 wines or the different vineyards that you own.
Okay.
So we start with the Premier.
We start with the Premier. Yeah. So.
Oh, you've got a lovely half bottle. Nice.
I've got it in half bottles, yes, because I'm drinking on my own, and so you proposed those 4 wines, Paolo, and I think it's a very smart choice, if I may, because it's of course different terroirs and also different vintages and interesting vintages. Here we're in Volnay-Fremier. Fremier is a terroir that is to the north of the village of Volnay. It's very nicely located, sort of mid-height on the slope. But because it's mid-height and quite slopy, this is an area where the soil is actually quite shallow. You talk in centimeters in Hong Kong, yeah?
Yes.
So we have about 50 centimeters of soil before you hit the mother rock. Yeah. So it's important to understand that, because it explains why the wine tastes like it tastes. So you see, this wine, every time I taste this Premier, I have the same sensation, where the first impression, the attack, the first smell on the nose is very fruity, and then the back of the mouth is quite salty. And this is the minerality expresses itself at the end of the mouth in this particular wine, and quite strongly. In fact, you feel like almost like you've eaten an oyster and you've taken some seawater with it. The edge of your tongue is quite salty. It is very typical of Fremier, and this, I think, reflects what I just said earlier, which is the fact that the soil is shallow, the vines have to go through the mother rock in order to find some water, and that brings minerality back into the grapes and into the wine eventually. So it's a very beautiful terroir, quite white soil, and when we plow, we bring back some quite big stones, because we're so close to the mother rock. So the parcel itself is about 1.6 hectares, quite a nice size.
In one piece.
In one piece, yes.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, almost always the most precocious parcel because of its location on the slope and facing plain east. It ripens quite early, and we almost every year we harvest it number one.
Okay. And how about 17? Please tell us a bit about the 17 vintage.
So 17, if we have to put us back into the context of Volnay and Burgundy, we have had a series of very difficult vintages from 12 onwards. And we'll go into that when we talk about the other vintages. But 17 was like a huge relief because it was a quote unquote classical vintage. No what we call now climatic accident during that year, a normal season, and a very beautiful, in my mind, quite Pinot Noir style vintage, but particularly well suited for Volnay because you have that silkiness, this velvety style, very clean, very pure style of wines in 17, which I think the vintage deserves a lot more recognition than I think it has had, because a lot of people have focused on 18 being such an exuberant vintage and large size and everything else. But in fact, for the admirer of Pinot, 17 I think is a wonderful vintage to own and to drink.
And drink early, would you say, as well as aging?
Yeah, I think it will age forever. But if you taste this wine today, of course, I don't know how it tastes in Hong Kong because the voyage sometimes makes a difference. But I think today it tastes very, very nicely to me. So it's in fact, I think a lot of those wines will be drunk early.
Quite early, yes.
Yeah. But
people like to compare this to the 07. How different or how much similarity do you find in these two wines or these two vintages?
Yeah, my remembrance of 07 is a much more tender style of wine. It's a beautiful wine too, 7, but here you have additional tension and energy that was not so present in 07. 07 was indeed very approachable early, very tender, like I said. Drinkability was easy from day one almost. Here you have a lot more tension. It's a sharper wine. It's a sharper style of vintage than 07 was.
Would you say a bit more serious as well?
Perhaps a bit more serious, but in a nice way.
Of course. And this is
I have a soft spot for this vintage. I have to say I have a soft spot for 17. I do.
Good. So do I, because it's my youngest daughter's year.
Ah, yes.
Okay. Moving along to my favorite in your lineup. Also a very important vintage, Caje 15.
Yeah. So just looking at the glass, you see the difference between those two vintages. And in fact, the thing that really makes you know that it's a solar vintage is the color, because once in the mouth, it's not so clear. But the color is quite deep, especially for my wines. Is as you know them well, Paolo. I've never been looking for extra color. I don't care very much about color, but here in 15, the color was quite deep, very ruby style, quite deep, and very much deeper than the 17 we just tasted. This is a year 15 which was a drought. So I was telling you earlier about the difficult vintages we faced from 12 onwards. 15 was not a difficult vintage per se, because we made great wines, and the season was jolly. The wines were very beautiful, very exuberant. But we had no rain, or very little rain. We faced a big drought in June and July with very, very little rain at all until the very beginning of August, where finally we received, I think, 30 or 50 millimeters of rain. So this vintage is marked by that in 15. It's marked by this lack of water, but already it looks like the plant had, let's say, gotten used to the fact that the climate change is upon us. I personally feel that really 18 is the vintage where the climate change is most visible in the wines of Burgundy. But of course, 03 was the first signal. 15 was another signal that the plant had to adapt to much drier and warmer climate than in the past. Of course, the beauty about it is we harvest completely ripe grapes, which was not the case in the previous generation. When my father was making the wines, he was harvesting in late September, sometimes in October, and yet it was not fully ripe. We started the harvest in 15 on the 4th of September, and look at this wine. It's perfectly ripe.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the Caje. What makes it so special?
Well, conventional wisdom through a local saying is that if you, if you don't know Caje, you don't know Volnay. So Caje is located on the south hill of the village. Volnay, the vineyards of Volnay are located on two hills, one to the north, one to the south of the village, which sits in the middle of those two hills. Caje is on the south hill. It's facing plain east. It's quite high on the hill too, but very stony. Caje, the word Caje comes from caillou, which means stone in French. So you're not surprised if you see a very stony vineyard and also a very mineral kind of wine. It has a huge elegance, this wine, I find. Caje, always very elegant and seductive at the same time. Very clean, lovely bouquet in this particular case. Of course, 15, very much characterized by beautiful aromas in the winery when we first harvested the grapes, and still looking that way today. Actually, this has a long life ahead of it. It will take longer for this 15 to reach its peak than for the 17 to reach its peak. There's no question about that.
Would you say this is shutting down a little bit?
I would say it's never really completely opened yet. That's what I would say.
Okay.
There's still some ways to go.
Right. And what about the oak treatment? I think we haven't talked about vinification. So tell us a little bit about your way of winemaking, please.
Yeah. So of course, the general philosophy of the estate is minimal intervention by the winemaker. We believe that the terroir has to speak for itself, and we are very much adept of a sentence that was once said to me by Alan Meadows, which is quite well known to the Burgundy crowd. He said once to me, he said, Guillaume, your wines are not made, they are born. And I like this image, this picture of the wines being born and me as a midwife, you know, kind of style. I facilitate the birth of the wine, but I try not to intervene too much. And of course, what it translates into is that we get the berries back, we sort them on a sorting table, we destem 100% of the crop, and we put the berries into the vats with as little trituration as possible. And then once they are in the vat, again, we prefer soft extraction to brutal extraction. And we have never, at the estate, at the Marquis d'Angerville estate, we have never punched down in the vats, which is quite unusual in Burgundy, where most people do punch down. We only recycle the juice. In other words, we pump the juice at the bottom of the vat and just spray it back up at the top in order to extract almost like you're brewing tea, as opposed to extracting, punching down with the risk of getting some fake tastes that you wouldn't want to have into the wines. So the idea being really we make the wines from the berries and that's it, and that's what it should be. It's after all, it's grape juice and that has fermented, and that's it. So that's our idea. And then of course we have a very short period of maceration before the fermentation, maybe 2 or 3 days, and then the fermentation starts and it goes on, hopefully without any intervention from us. We just check density versus temperature, and if there is a big discrepancy, we might want to adjust temperature a little bit, down or up depending. And then fermentation takes place over a period of maybe 2 to 3 weeks, reaching at the end temperature around 32 degrees Celsius. And then all the sugar has been eaten up by indigenous yeasts, of course, and then we press the vats and put them down into the cellar via gravity, because the winery itself sits on top of the cellars, as you know, Paolo. So we can just drop the wines using gravity in the cellars below. And then, of course, élevage is the lazy part. There's not much to do there other than checking the wines on a regular basis. And the élevage is done in wood, of course, but not much new wood. And in fact, I'm continuously checking that, testing that. But on average, I was between 20 and 25% new wood, depending on whether it was Claudia Duke or other Premier Crus. But I am tempted by reducing even more the percentage of new oak. I'm not saying there's a good answer and a bad answer to that question of new oak, but I'm saying that for the purpose of making Premier Crus in Volnay, too much new oak can be really detrimental to the wines, because they are so delicate and so clean and pure that if there is too much wood, you lose that sensation of purity and cleanliness that is so appealing to me.
Okay, brilliant. So, thank you for that. Let's move on to the Champagne 14.
Yeah. So I said earlier that we had a series of difficult vintages. You know, in 2014 came after 2 vintages of very damaging hailstorms. In 2012 we had 2 hailstorms, and in 2013 we had 1 at the end of July, but which was also very damaging. So we thought, you know, we've had it twice, we were not going to have a third time. It's not possible. and yet it happened. We had another hailstorm in 2014 on the 28th of June, after what promised to be a very beautiful season. But the hailstorm hit, and we lost quite a large proportion of the crop, maybe 35% was lost in about 15 minutes. So it's very, very painful, of course, for many reasons, but emotionally for the team that has worked very hard to have a perfectly kept vineyard, to see so many hours of work destroyed in so few minutes, it's always a very, very painful thing to go through. But the blessing was first that Claudia Duke was hardly hit, in fact, by that hailstorm in 2014. Champagne was a little bit. This is Champagne. This is taken from Champagne, this picture. Champagne was hit a little bit in 2014, but you know, we had gained knowledge about how to treat vintages which had been hit by a hailstorm. And for example, in 2014, we cleaned the must of the reds like we normally do on the whites, if you see what I'm saying. So on day one into the vats, we actually took out the juice that evening. We let it still for the night, and the next day we repumped the juice on the original vat, but left the bottom of the vat where the juice had stayed overnight, and that was left and not put back in, you know. And that piece at the bottom is what produces what we call the hail taste. And in fact, it is a mixture of soil, a mixture of soil with some leaves, everything else not clean, because the hailstorm actually destroys so many things that it and therefore, by using that mechanism, which is normally only used on white wines, we actually produced in 2013 and 14 wines which never had that hail taste that I was talking about.
So it's what, like a leafy type of taste?
It's leafy and it's earthy.
Earthy, okay.
Leafy, earthy, and sometimes it's a dry finish.
So Champagne, which one was the most hit in 14?
Taille, Caje, Champagne were hit in the same way. That side of Volnay was hit most. Fremier and Claudia Duke were on the other side of the village, not so hit.
Okay.
But you see here, you have this wine. I think, frankly, you could never tell it's been hit by hail because it has all the ingredients of a great Champagne. It's very velvety, very silky. The tannins are nicely integrated, and the mouth is very long. You know, it's persistent. It's a persistent wine. And I put 14 also in that group of vintages, which are, what I said also about 17 is true too there. It's a typical Pinot Noir style vintage, you know, like in my mind, 08, 11, 14, even 16, 17 are the same style, which I think fit particularly well the grape that we grow here, and fit particularly well Volnay, which with its elegance and you know, quite delicate structure, generally speaking. You see again here we go back to quite a pale color, but it's quite a deceptive color, because in spite of the pale color, actually the wine has a lot of momentum and grip in the mouth.
But 14 for me is a vintage that never really closed down. I mean, it's a year that I've been following for since the beginning, because it's my son's vintage. In fact, today I picked all my children's vintages. So and I mean, it's very elegant, and you can drink it now, and I feel like there's enough substance to really keep it going for a long time.
Indeed, indeed, and there's that freshness, acidity that provides the backbone to the wine, which will make sure the wine will age properly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
Absolutely.
before we move to Claudia Duke, there was a question earlier about Champagne 76. Someone said they have a Champagne 76. When was the last time you had it? And how is it tasting now, and will it keep?
I have a little story about 76 if I have a bit of time. Firstly, in 76, believe it or not, I was 20 years old, and I was present on the estate for the entire harvest. Before and after, I was on the estate for a full month around the harvest. It was a very precocious year, 76. We harvested the whites on the 6th of September, which was unheard of at the time. And we harvested the reds on the 13th. We started the harvest on the 13th of September, which has remained the previous record before '03 hit. And you know, in 2000, 2003 was the earliest until 2020, which is now 2020 is the earliest. We started on the 19th of August in 2020. So a full month before 76. But 76 at the time was perceived as being extremely early. And it was a great vintage in many ways. People were very, very excited about the vintage. But to be honest, it turned out a little bit more complicated than anticipated because the wines remained very, very close for a long time. And here is the anecdote. At the time, like I said, I was 20, and I said to my father that since I was 20 during the harvest, I deserved a few large formats that I would promise not to open until we broke Y2K, year 2000. And my father agreed to that and gave me 3 Jeroboams of 76, of 1976, 2 of Claudia Duke and 1 of Champagne. And I made the commitment not to open them before December 31st, 1999. And the result was I opened 1 Claudia Duke on that particular day to celebrate the year 2000. And I found it really closed. It was 24 years old in a Gero. And so it was a bit of a disappointment, but about 6 years later, we celebrated with some friends here the 30th anniversary of 76 in 2006. And we were a bunch of wine growers, some of whom you will recognize the names like Bono du Martret, Bruno Clair, Pierre Moret, Michel Lafarge, and a few others, maybe half a dozen winemakers. And we all brought Jeroboams as well. And then the wines were really fully open and really excitingly so. So
all of you brought 76?
Yes, all of us brought 76.
Okay.
We had a 76 Montrachet from Pierre Moret. We had Claude Echenne 76. We had Corton Charlemagne 76 from Bono du Martret. I forget what Bruno Clair had brought something amazing as well. So it was a
in those days, it was probably Claire Daru. It wasn't Bruno Clair in 76. It was Claire Daru. I know this because it's my vintage.
It's your vintage. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well,
so I've tasted a few 76s.
I have a few Dukes left in 76, Paolo. If you come back to visit one time,
all right,
we might open one for you.
Wonderful.
So to come back to the question of your of the person in the audience, I would say yes. The wines are ready to be drunk in 76. I see no reason why they wouldn't last any longer if they are properly kept. But it's been a great vintage, and it took a long time to open. But now they're last time I drank a Champagne 76 is quite a while ago. But I opened the Claudia Duke 76 Uh, I suppose it was in before the summer. No, sorry, it's a year ago. I did a vertical of Claudia Duke in April 19, and the 76 was showing beautifully at the time. Yeah.
Okay, great. So on to the Claudia Duke 14.
Yeah.
So please explain to us about this outstanding piece of land, the
Yes.
Holy Grail.
Yes. You know, Claudia Duke is located. I don't know if you can come back to the picture when you see the Claudia Duke from the top. Claudia Duke is located on the
Here. I'm blocking it. This one?
Yeah, it's the other one that was on the invitation, I think.
Oh, right.
That's the Champagne. Claudia Duke is located on the north hill of the village, but it's facing.
This one?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, but
okay.
Of course it's hidden behind.
It's tough to see. Yeah, yeah.
So you have to imagine a very slopy vineyard, which sits on the bottom left-hand corner of a hill. So that you have to imagine two slopes, one slope facing plain east and one slope almost as steep facing south. This particular vineyard here has this double exposure, sits on the northern hill of the village facing east and southeast. So it's a beautifully located vineyard. It's because it sits on that corner of the North Hill. It sits very close to the village. It's actually my backyard. It's just behind the house. And it benefits from that breeze that comes in between the two hills. Imagine the village sits at the bottom of my two hands here, and there's always a breeze coming down, and it hits Claudia Duke. Very important because Pinot Noir does not like that heat, too much heat in the summer, and every night to get that breeze that actually refreshes the vineyard every night is very important. That's one key element of Claudia Duke. The other element, of course, is the soil. It's a very deep soil, contrarily to Fremier. There's about 1 meter of soil before the mother rock. It's a combination of limestone and clay, of course. It's called marne blanche, white marls, with a high content of limestone, and but good enough in clay so that there is water retention, and the slope makes sure that there is no excess water on the surface ever. And finally, there are some underground springs in that particular area, so that there is never any hydric stress in Claudia Duke. For example, in vintage 15, where all the vineyards of the estate suffered from the drought, in Claudia Duke we had the normal annual yield approximately, whereas all the others were down 30% because of the drought. Claudia Duke showed the normal yield because it could get the water from the underground springs. So it's a very important element also of that particular vineyard. So if we summarize the soil composition, white marls, the exposure, which is east and south at the same time, gets the first ray of sun in the morning, the underground springs, the position on the hill, of course, quite high. You know, the bottom of Claudia Duke is 310 meters, or 300 meters, let's say, goes to 320 at the top, which is, for Burgundy standards, quite a high altitude, which keeps the vineyard fresh also with that breeze and the position on the hill below the woods. Very intriguing vineyard. You know, it's about 2.15 hectares in size. And we have historical evidence. I won't go into details, but we have historical evidence dating from 1507, that the size of Claudia Duke was identical in 1507, 2.15 hectares. So, you know, there is a good reason why the limits of Claudia Duke are what they are. Over several generations, people have been understanding the wines, and they've decided that after that wall that is the limit of Claudia Duke to the north, the terroir is different enough that it deserves a different name.
Okay. So obviously you've been asked this question a lot. What's the difference between Claudia Duke and also Lafarge's Clos du Château de Duke?
Well, it's a very different type of exposure and slope, Clos du Château de Duc. It's located in the middle, almost in the middle of the village, Clos du Château de Duc. Slopey, but not hugely slopey. So very different from Clos de Duc, which is very slopey. And the soil of Clos du Château de Duc, I must say, I'm not entirely familiar with, but quite different. So the name comes from the same, of course, origin. Volnay was a summer residence for the Dukes of Burgundy, and they loved the village. And of course, you know, the Clos de Duc itself, my monopole, was the original Clos de Duc, the one that they produced their wines from. And then, of course, there was a chateau in Volnay that was owned by the Dukes, hence the name of Clos du Château des Ducs. And it's funny because, you know, when the kings of France actually invaded Burgundy and took over Burgundy, most of the Clos des Ducs that were known in many different villages were turned into Clos du Roi, you know, like Corton Clos du Roi, for example. In Volnay, we resisted that change, and we still have three names boasting dukes in it. My Clos des Ducs monopole, Clos du Château des Ducs you just talked about, and Clos de la Cave des Ducs, which is vinified by Ben Leroux. So it's quite an interesting thing. So the difference between Clos de Duc and the rest is really the level of complexity in this wine. You know, there is no wine that makes your tasting buds so active in my range. When you have this wine in your mouth, you have this sensation, which is, of course, the fruit, but so many other things, and a lot of spices, a peppery sensations on the nose, some cinnamon, some leather, some floral aromas as well. And all of that combines into something which is incredibly complete and harmonious. And so if I had one word to differentiate Clos de Duc from the other wines we tasted this morning, it would be that complexity that doesn't go in the way of elegance and harmony and balance. That's what makes, in my mind, Clos de Duc so special. And of course, with this persistence, because, you know, I've been talking to you about it for a few minutes and I still have it in my mouth as I speak.
So one of the questions I received was, does it mean that this wine requires the most aging in your lineup? And when will be the ideal age to drink it? Would it be, you know, 7, 10, 15 years after the vintage?
The short answer to the first question is yes. Generally speaking, Clos de Duc is the one that requires the longest in order to give and provide everything it can provide. The other wines in the range are ready earlier, generally speaking. Now, in terms of the optimal time to drink, of course, it depends on every vintage. It goes without saying. And of course, it depends on everyone's tastes. You know, who am I to say that you will prefer a 15-year-old wine as opposed to a 10-year-old wine? It's very hard to take a position on that. What I'm certain about is that this Clos de Duc 2014, you know, will age for a long time, and it will, to me, provide additional sensations for probably at least another 10, 15 years, and then it will reach a very long plateau. You know, people should not be worried about the aging potential of those wines, any of those wines, but certainly not Clos de Duc. You know, there is a long plateau before the wine falls off, generally speaking, and you have early signs when that happens, and so you have plenty of time to drink the rest of your bottles. So and you know, we've had in recent verticals that I've made, we've tasted some very old Claudia Dukes. In fact, I tasted not so long ago a Claudia Duke 1920, which was
20. Wow.
1920, which was quite a remarkable experience. So, you know, of course, I'm not arguing that we should be waiting 100 years to drink the wines, but
we did drink the 34 together, if you remember, in Paris.
Yes, courtesy of you. I remember that evening very, very well. Yes. But what I will say is that in this 2014 is very pleasant today. It will be definitely very pleasant for 10 to 15 years, and then it will not move for quite some time. It will not improve any longer. It will not provide anything different, but it will last a long time, a long plateau before it starts falling off.
Okay. Now, one last question before we got cut off. Another question from a very good client. Why isn't this a Grand Cru? Why wasn't this classified as a Grand Cru?
Okay, in 2 minutes. I said earlier to you in the conversation that my grandfather had been charged by his peers to write down the hierarchy of Côte de Beaune and Côte de Nuit in 1935 with his friend Henri Gouge. These two gentlemen had a great view about what unethical behavior was. And they said publicly before they started the work that there would be no Grand Cru in Volnay and no Grand Cru in Nuit Saint-Georges, so that everyone should be reassured that they were not playing for themselves, but that they were playing for the general interest of the region. And to this day, of course, there's no Grand Cru in Volnay and no Grand Cru in Nuit Saint-Georges. Of course, is there other reasons why not? Maybe, but I have to say many people have come to me and said, yes, we think Claudia Duke is a Grand Cru. And my answer has always been the same. Perhaps it's true, but would that change my life if Claudia Duke was a Grand Cru today? Probably not. And I am much more keen to have the cohesion of the village unchanged than to promote Claudia Duke to a Grand Cru if that's going to upset other people. Of course, if all the villages had a Grand Cru, I would argue that Claudia Duke should be the Grand Cru of Volnay. But the philosophy of Grand Crus is that there must be a natural break between the 26 Grand Crus in red, I think there are in Burgundy, and the rest. And of course, if you start promoting, for example, Claudia Duke or Les Saint-Georges in Nuit Saint-Georges to Grand Cru, you would have to have the discipline to demote some of the Grand Crus that exist today to Premier Cru, because it cannot be a one-way street. It has to be both ways in order to maintain the credibility of the system.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time, Guillaume. Time flies. It's almost an hour, and they just cut us off immediately. But it was great chatting with you and sharing all the insight on your domain and the lovely wines that you produce. I wish you and everybody at the domain and the family a great end of the year. And I hope, I'll be able to travel again and come and see you. And likewise, for you to come to Hong Kong and we can have some dim sum together.
Exactly. I look forward to that, Paolo. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you all for listening and enjoy the wines.
All right. Thank you. Cheers, Guillaume.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.